All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Tara. So officially, welcome everyone. It's nice to see so many of your names on the screen. Unfortunately, we're only seeing names and not faces because we're on Zoom and not in person. So my name is Daniela Labate-Cavelli. I am from NIAPers, and we're a MCTAC partner. I'm joined today by my colleague, Eve Addis.
Hi.
Hi, Eve. Thank you. So this meeting is sort of the follow-up to the conversation that started a few months ago in the Workforce Priorities webinar series that ICL has put out. And there's actually another part of that series happening tomorrow, so we encourage you to join that offering as well. And this is titled, "The Conversation Continues, Using Human Resources to Support Organizational Health and Resilience." So Eve and I are really going to focus on organizational health today and how human resources is a big part of supporting an organization's health and resilience. So as Tara said, this meeting is being recorded. The slides will be posted on the MCTAC website. We are doing something a little different in that we're using Zoom as a way to communicate with you today and not in, real time and space in a room together. We're in a Zoom room together today. So we want this to be as conversational as we can. Eve and I are going to do a little bit of presentation. We do have some slides, but we really do want to use the chat box feature as much as we can. We want you to feel free to speak up. So you do have the ability to unmute your phones. And we'll get to that in a minute. But there's just another quick 2 housekeeping slides, and then we'll get into the whole logistics of how this is going to work. So is there anybody new to MCTAC out there? If you are, MCTAC is a training, consultation, and educational resource center that offers resources to all behavioral health providers, that's mental health and substance use providers in New York State. And our goal is to provide training and intensive support on quality improvement strategies, including business, organizational, and clinical practices to achieve the overall goal of preparing and assisting providers with the transition to Medicaid managed care. So hopefully we may have 1 or 2 new folks on the phone today, not really sure. All right, so this particular offering was put together by some of MCTAC's partners. So we've got the Coalition for Behavioral Health, NIAPers, which is where Eve and I are from, and ICL, of course, developed the original series, and ASAP. So you'll see various versions of representatives from our agencies and organizations in different meetings. So we have 3 main learning objectives for today. We really hope that you'll be able to broaden your own awareness of your organization's culture by coming today and chatting with us today. We hope that you'll identify at least 1 actionable item for you to start to address as part of addressing your organization's culture. And we hope that you'll use the information that you get today and the conversation that you've had with us today to think about how you can be more prepared or better prepare yourself to face any external challenges or factors that contribute to your organization's culture. So here we go. We want you to join the discussion. We'd prefer that you keep your phones muted when you're not speaking, just to sort of help minimize the background distractions, and Eve and I will do the same, and hopefully you won't hear my rotten little dog again. We'd like you to use the chat box to comment or, type in any comments or questions. If you don't feel, if you feel more comfortable using the chat box, please do that, whatever your preference is. And we're going to try, we've not done this before, so this is sort of an experiment. We've got like 12 folks on the phone, which is not a huge group. So I think we can manage to use the phones and unmute yourselves in order to speak. And if that doesn't work, then we'll have to just mute the phone lines and we'll use the chat box, which we've had a lot of success using the chat box in the past. So that's certainly an option for us, but let's try and use the phone and make this a little bit more conversational. So first thing I guess we're going to do is, since this is a nice little meeting here, we're going to ask you to introduce yourself. tell us what your name is, where you're from, and what brought you here today. Like why do you want to be in this meeting today? What are you hoping to get out of this meeting today? So because we have about 12 participants on the phone, I'm just going to go through the line here in my list of participants, and I'm going to call on you and ask you to unmute your phone. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, please just use the chat box. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Arami, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I work as a peer worker, and I'm kind of in between doing remote work and just kind of being at the being with the organization as well, just physically there. And I do outreach services. So any information that you guys have to offer would really be very helpful right now, because I'm just trying to think of a new game plan in terms of just supporting clients right now. And that's probably one of the hardest things. So
Yep.
That's why I'm here.
Great, thank you. Berta? I hope I'm not butchering people's names.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Hi, it is Bertia.
Bertia, okay,
Yes,
sorry
everyone,
about that.
No problem, everyone butchers my name. So I work for Restoration Society. I feel like I'm screaming. I work for Restoration Society. We're a non-for-profit. And mainly I'm with the housing unit as of right now. I was with the Hope team a few months back and our contract ended. So we were basically getting people signed up for HARP benefits, which is health and recovery planning. So now I am with the Housing Solutions CV19 team. And what we're doing is preventative measures for people who may be in maybe about to lose their housing or behind on their rent or homeless, anything of that nature. So I'm just here to learn as much as I can. To learn
All right,
as
great.
much as
Welcome.
I can about whatever I can. All right, and it's good to meet you all.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Cornelia.
I'm sorry, he stepped away from his desk for a second.
Oh, okay. I assumed that you're coworkers then.
Yes, we are. He's my supervisor, actually.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. We'll come back to Cornelius. Demetris?
Good morning. My name is Demetris Jones. I work at Cases. I'm a clinical case coordinator, social worker. I work with the Bell reform that they just passed the law. So I deal with all type of people, relations and mental health, substance abuse. We're trying to make sure these ladies and men, make sure they do not get back incarcerated. So I used to work at Rikers Island. I used to discharge the people to go home. So I'm on the other side right now. So I'm just here to learn more, ideas and different things. So I would like to say good morning to everybody.
Great. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let's hear from Faith next. Maybe Faith stepped away. I'm going to go to Helga.
Yes, good morning. This is Helga Baltimore. I work with Catholic Charities. I'm a care coordinator, and I'm hoping to learn, because we're dealing with a lot of people who have mental health issues, maybe a little thing about emotional, to help the clients emotionally.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Welcome.
Well,
Let's hear from Jess. We have a Jess and a Jessica. So let's hear from Jess H first.
Oh, he just sent a message that says he's at the office, so he has to stay muted.
Thank you for that, Eve.
He's from Unity House of Troy as a medical
Perfect.
transportation coordinator.
Okay. Very good. Let's hear from Jessica then.
Must have stepped away from her desk.
All right, let's try Kimberly. Don't be shy, folks. Oh, wait, someone.
Oh, so I think Kimberly, they're also from Unity House of Troy, but there are issues with their mic. So they mentioned that what they want to learn is they want to learn how they can help better from this webinar.
Perfect. Thank you so much for seeing that. Mary?
Morning. This is Mary Pallister. I'm from the MHA of Genesee and Orleans counties. I am the director for the Recovery Center. I am a peer specialist who supervises all peer staff. I think it's important as social workers that we're always communicating with each other, because there's always going to be a perspective that you didn't think about. And I think we always have to be open to so many different scenarios, different cases. So I'm just really hoping to learn as well.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we have a Jacqueline on the line.
Yes, hi, I'm Jacqueline Stoll, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Project Hospitality in Staten Island, New York. And I oversee human resources as one of my duties, and just always looking for ideas on how to support our staff during this difficult time as they're working with our most vulnerable clients.
Great. And we're going to actually get to, you had mentioned that you have a double role, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit today too. We don't always have organizations where you have a dedicated HR person and that's their only role. So welcome. Thanks for sharing that with us today.
No problem.
We're going to ask you about that later, probably. All right. So let's see. Did I already? Yes, we went to. So let's go to Olga. Did I already call on Olga? And then we've got Taylor or Jillian. All right, so we may have some issues with mics and muting and such. So please feel free to use the chat box if you like. But thank you so much for those of you that did unmute. That went quite well, much better than I expected. I thought it may have been a little bit of a mess, but we did good. All right, so thanks for that. We have an idea of who's in the room with us today, which will sort of help Eve and I to get the conversation going and put it in the right direction for you. So next thing we're going to do is we're really going to just sort of dive into organizational health and talk about what organizational health is. So Eve, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off on this part.
Okay, but you're advancing the slides, so
I gotcha.
All right, so organizational health, usually, when we talk about health, we're thinking about a human organism or an organism. An organization is an organism. It's the word, right? It's the organization, organism, and it has a lot of parts. And a healthy organization is one where all the parts are working and where they're hopefully working together so that there is a connection between all the parts of the organization. So when we think about what, we have a little photo here of a stethoscope to sort of make the point here is that, there are measures that we look at when we want to see whether we're healthy, right? So if as human beings, we would check our hearts and we would check our kidney function. Well, organizations also have these measures. So a measure for an organization's health would be its financial status. Does it have the revenue to support its operations, right? That's a healthy organization has that. What about its what about its compliance status? So every organization has regulatory function, regulatory oversight. And so do its policies and do the expectations of its stakeholders and do they follow the regs of their licensing or funding organizations? So, because after all, if that's not in place, the organization isn't going to survive. And then, since we're all human resources organizations, the workforce is key. So we need to have a workforce that has the competence to deliver the services that the organization exists for. So all our organizations have a reason for existing, and in terms of providing some kind of service, some kind of output. And so do we have the people in the organization that do that effectively? And then another measure is how we are perceived by the people we serve. So we want to know always, do the people we serve feel that we are doing the job that they came to us for? So are we doing the work that where we exist to do, and do the people who we serve recognize that? And the workforce also has to be in some way in sync with all of this. So we want to know that our workforce is working in an environment where they feel that they can be their most productive. And that would show itself if we were to measure workforce satisfaction. So these are static measures that we could go in to an organization pretty much and get this data, and that would let us know whether we are at least within these dimensions, whether the organization is healthy. Now, there are other more dynamic measures that underlie all of this. So for example, an organization, all of you have have your mission and values. So you all operate in a way that hopefully is aligned. So, you know, the organization, this is sort of the soul, if you will, of the organization. And here we're talking about how everyone at all levels of the organization has the same kind of understanding and is operating from the same kind of principles, so that there is an alignment. If that doesn't exist, and that is always in play, right? Because, you know, the organization may be changing, the organization may be going through, you know, some growth, but everyone in the organization, from the C-suite all the way to the folks who are on the front lines, they all have to be aligned in terms of values, mission, and aspiration. If that is misaligned, then there's going to be a breakdown somewhere. So it's very important to make sure that this alignment exists. A second one, and one that we are kind of dealing with right now with COVID, is how capable is the organization in adapting to sort of changes that happen externally, or changes over which they have no control. So something happens, you know, and this COVID is a prime example. I mean, nobody expected this, but it all pushed us into a world where we had to change very quickly. We had to make decisions very quickly. And some organizations are very good at that. And partly it is because the things, the values, the mission, and the aspirations are all aligned. So everybody is working together. Everybody understands that they're working together, and everybody is on the same page, so to speak. So that is that gives an organization a capacity to adapt to change more quickly and more effectively. And then there's this other element here, which is how safe people feel. And safety here has, you know, probably more, but we're going to mention 3 dimensions. So that the environment, the physical environment, feels safe, so that people are coming to work and they feel that the environment they're in, the physical environment, is a safe one. So they're not preoccupied with their safety, and they're able to focus on their work. And then there's the personal safety. So as an individual, do I feel safe here? And this has to do more with equity issues. It has to do with diversity issues, and we're going to get to this a little bit later. But keep in mind that people need to feel that they are validated and that they are and that their contributions to the organization are respected and so on. And that sort of represents a personal safety. And then there's the relational piece, which is in interactions, within, for example, the supervisor employee interaction, the interaction between the employee and the larger hierarchy, the people in the organization that have more power in the organization, that one feels safe in those relationships. So these are dynamic measures. They sort of are again, the lifeblood. And it's very important that these elements, alignment, capacity for adaptation, and safety are high, so that an organization's health is stable and good. Go ahead. So again, just to make the point even more, concretely, when we talk about environment here, a workplace environment, it encompasses the physical space, the personal, as I said before, environment, and how a person feels they fit in and they're respected. And then again, the very important one is the relationships. So do people in an organization feel safe in their relationships with other people in the organization, and particularly with the people who supervise them or who have some measure of evaluation or continued, people who basically have the power to hire and fire. So resilience really refers to that issue of adaptation. So we are all kind of in an environment, for example, where money is always an issue for not-for-profits, and there are budget cuts and there are things that happen that are out of our control. And so organizations are always, especially in the not-for-profit world, where there is no sort of large amounts of money in reserve to cover any kind of financial problem. Budget cuts are one of those things that most organizations have to deal with every year when the budgets come out. So this is something that organizations need to be able to adapt to and be able to change very quickly, because if you don't, you're going to ultimately run a deficit, and that's going to really be an impact on the health of the organization. The pandemic is another example. As I mentioned earlier, we had to kind of move very quickly to continue delivering services to the people we serve. And again, some organizations were better at it. They stepped up and they were able to make things happen very quickly and move very quickly. And other organizations weren't as effective. Maybe they caught up, or maybe they didn't. But the point is that resilience, an organization is resilient when it's able to kind of face all these obstacles head on and be able to make the right decisions to continue and not be thwarted by these unforeseen or sudden events. So being nimble, being flexible, being agile, an organization that has a workforce that can sort of move quickly and be flexible. So, for example, in the world of the pandemic and COVID, people were told, well, listen, we're going to move you to this area. You're going to move to that area because that's where the need is higher. People all of a sudden had to work virtually. So these are all things that have, that are indicative of flexibility and agility. I wonder, does anybody else have any other thing that happened as a result of COVID that required them to be nimble, flexible, and agile?
I'm going to put it out there. I work from home right now with a husband, 3 kids, 4 animals. So that made me be very nimble and very agile very quickly. And we all had to adapt. You know, everybody's doing their schoolwork from home. I'm working from home. You know, we have to share internet space. Thankfully, we don't have to share laptops, but other folks I know have to share laptops, and it can be difficult to make that adjustment.
Yeah, I think you know there's a sort of this phrase that's come out, and it's called Zoom fatigue, and it's how people are kind of having to figure out how they're going to manage this new Zoom life that we've all entered. Okay, the third bullet really speaks to in a crunch, decisions have to be made. And some organizations are very, very dense. And in order for a decision to be made, it has to go across the hierarchy for approval. And that's fine when you have time and when you have space. When you are kind of in a crunch, you want to have managers who are empowered to make decisions. And we're not talking about decisions that aren't within their scope of oversight. I'm talking about that they just have the power, they have the trust of their supervisors, they have the trust of the organizational leadership to make certain decisions within the scope of their positions. And I have to say that's very important, because if you've got to make a decision, if you're working and have to make a decision right away because you are hit with something very suddenly, and that decision is going to be kind of really important in terms of the work of the organization. Organizations that, you know, people who then have to stop before they can act and have to request approvals, that bogs things down. And it could be dangerous, because in the meantime, somebody out there who would have been helped by that decision is now left to wait until approval comes through. So empowering people to make decisions in those situations is an important aspect of resilience. Again, the swift action that people, that the organizational culture respects and supports that. It supports people's independence. It supports people's ability to act, and also that this is an organization that promotes learning. And what I mean by that is that sometimes, you know, you'll make a decision and it won't work out. But you had the best intentions and you use the best information to make that decision. So an organization is resilient when it allows people to make mistakes, and where there is a respect for learning, because we all learn by our mistakes. And then finally, and this speaks to the alignment piece again across the organization, is communication. That there's a constant flow of communication that's clear, and that's transparent, that people are not wondering what things mean, that information is delivered in a clear way, in a timely way, and in an honest way, so that everybody feels trust in kind of the information that they're hearing. Because if you are, again, bogged down with trying to figure out what something means or whether something is true or real, you're not going to be able, you know, you're going to be stuck in that figuring it out phase and not be able to act based on that information. So, you know, this is kind of another word for that is fluidity, that you have the information you need, you trust it, and you can act on it.
And Eve, I just want to interject here for a minute. A few of these bullet points were taken from something called the Organizational Culture Assessment Questionnaire. It's basically a one-page tool, and there is a link to the website where you can find it online at the end of the slide deck here. But it's basically a one-page tool that you can use to sort of take the pulse of your organization's health and sort of identify some areas that you're probably really good at and some that you may need to sort of beef up a little bit. So we wanted to put that out there and just say this tool is out there and it's a pretty good tool. We liked it, so we thought we would share it with you. Of course, we have We have not written it, and we don't, it's not our tool, but we did find it, and we thought it was a nice tool to share with you.
Yeah, it's actually a good way to kind of, beginning with that first slide, to improve our self-awareness by kind of getting that tool and not only kind of doing it, and responding to it, but having a broad conversation across the organization. I mean, really letting it be something that stimulates a healthy conversation. Because all these things that we're talking about and all the things that you'll see on that tool, are the elements that represent health and resilience. So Daniela said it's the pulse, and to keep the metaphor of health going.
Right.
But I really think it's the electrocardiogram of health. Because it's as I said, it really gives you a sense of where you as an organization may need to kind of think about and improve how the organization operates.
And another interesting thing, actually, Tara, I just want to say thank you to Tara, who's behind the scenes sort of helping us out. And if you do, by the way, have any technical difficulties, you can certainly chat in the chat box and Tara will help you or try to help you. So she just put the link to that questionnaire in the chat box for you, so you can just copy paste that if you like into your browser and take a quick look at it. The other thing I was thinking about while we were chatting just now is, wouldn't it be interesting to have, several layers of your staff, of the workforce, do the assessment and then get together in a room and see if everybody's on the same page. Does everyone really look at the organization the same way? What might that say about your organization? If there are some differences and major differences.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions about this, or any reflections, or anything they want to let us know before we move on to the next few slides? Remember,
again,
we wanted this to be a conversation, folks. So, we really are eager to hear from you in terms of what your thoughts might be around some of this stuff.
We have a quiet group this morning. Maybe we should do these after lunch.
Yeah. No, after
right,
lunch. Let's move on.
Let's move on to the next section. Oh, there we go. All right. So, and also I just wanted to let you all know, the slide deck is available or will be available on the MCTAC-CTAC website. We have a lot of information in this deck, and we may not get through all of it. We may run through some of it very quickly. We may just say, we're going to leave this here for you to refer to later. So I just wanted to mention that. I should have mentioned that at the beginning, because there is a lot in this deck. So the next thing we're going to talk about, or the next section, I guess, of our conversation today, is to really talk about human resources role and how human resources should be promoting and supporting your organization's health and resilience. So there's different sort of functions that human resources has, and those functions really do support health and resilience in an organization, right? So the first one is, it's really important that the person who's doing your HR, or the people that do your HR, are part of the executive team. So they have to be able to be in a high-level decision-making position. This is sort of the question, or the slide where I ask the question, who out there does HR and another job? Who out there is only doing HR? And who out there on the phone is not doing HR, but has some dual role? So I think it's interesting to see sort of the levels of the organizations on the phone. Like, we may have some really big organizations that have a dedicated HR team. We definitely had an individual earlier who mentioned that they were the COO, I believe, and did HR.
Yeah.
You could be also outsourcing your human resources department. I've worked at organizations that have outsourced their human resources, and that it may pose its own challenges. If that person's not on site, or they're only on site 1 or 2 days out of the week, how do you have access to that person? how does that person really integrate in part of the executive team? How are they communicating? So there's different things to sort of think about when you're talking about your HR, your generalist, if you will.
Yeah, Daniela,
HR,
let me just say one thing here that, just to make this point, because the workforce, everybody on this webinar this morning, is part of a workforce of an organization. And workforce is the organization. And in human services organizations, the workforce is the organization. And the human resources function is specific. Its reason for existing is to manage workforce. It's to manage how an organization, and here we have recruits, hires, onboards, and all of that. But keep that in mind, which is why, Daniela, makes this point of that the person who manages HR, because that person manages the workforce, that person should be in the room with all the folks in the organization who make the major decisions for that organization. Because if that's not aligned, that's going to be a very big problem, because you're going to have decisions that are being made and a workforce that isn't part of making those decisions.
That's right. Thank you, Eve. And so the other functions, like Eve said, so the HR person or the HR department, human resources is responsible for the workforce, right? They're responsible for bringing the workforce in. How do you bring the workforce in? How are we recruiting people? What platforms are we using to recruit people? What language are we using to recruit people? Who are we hiring and how do we get them onboarded, right? So this is all about engagement, basically, right? So how do we engage our workforce? How do we get people in the door? How do we get them accustomed to the organizational culture, really? And do they fit in with the existing culture? And maybe they don't need to fit in with the existing culture because you want to change the culture, but we'll get to that in a little while. They're responsible for internal communication, communicating between staff at some points, right? They've got to be data driven. Your HR folks have to be data driven. They have to have the information that they need. They need to know what outcomes you're looking for, right? As an executive director, they need to know what are the outcomes that we want for people who are being provided services. And they want to know what the workforce experience is and how, in order to help really the workforce to identify what they need for training. Because if they don't know what the outcomes are, then they can't identify training needs. So it's really important to use that communication there. They've got to have good communication with the workforce at all levels, whether it's the C-suite level staff, the management staff, and the direct care staff. You want to take this one, Eve?
Sure. So, again, alignment is consistency, and I keep coming back to this alignment piece because I just think it's so crucial. So an employee starts a job, and we call that the employee journey. It begins with responding to the announcement, to that first contact with the whoever it is who is handling new employees or hiring. It goes through their interview. And then finally, if they are hired, it goes through their orientation and introduction to the organization. And one of the most important things here is that there's consistency across all those points in that journey, so that what was stated in the original announcement for the position is consistently reinforced and shared and discussed through the orientation and finally starting the job. And very often in organizations, there is a breakdown in that flow. So you have a brand, you're an organization, you have a brand, and you say, we do this, this, and this, and we're this kind of organization, blah, 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 whatever it is that you say. Well, then the person shows up and, hey, first of all, in their interview, that culture that was shared in that announcement is not evident. And so what happens is the person's experience as they move through is confusing, because what they're finding is as they move through this journey and they finally get to the job, and then, you know, it could happen, then they have a supervisor who doesn't really fit with what they expected or what they were told or how they were told they would be supervised, or how they were told their job, what their job would be. Sometimes it's as extreme as, you know, they were hired to do one job and then they show up and they're given a different job. And this has happened. You know, the title doesn't change, but the job responsibilities, so, you know, have changed. And, you know, and this is sort of common, I think, sometimes, because organizations, as the environment changes and the expectations change, organizations don't go back and redo their job descriptions. So the job description is 5 years old, and the expectations for the job is very different than it was 5 years before. So, so, you know, at the end, is the workforce's behavior aligned with the mission? You know, a mission statement also very often remains as an organization's mantra when the actual work of the organizations has changed, but the mission hasn't. So it's very important to keep all of these pieces in an employee's journey consistent, so that the person feels safe. And again, this is kind of why all of these things sort of are related to one another. Because if I'm hired to do one thing and I show up and I'm expected to do something else, that's going to shake me up a little bit. You know, what did I get myself into? And sometimes these things are very kind of flagrant, and sometimes they're more subtle. And so, you know, there could be sort of, that creates this underlying discomfort in the employee, which then will harm their competence. Because if a person is worried about something having to do with this employee journey, they're not going to be able to be fully present and do their job. Some of their attention and energy is going to be sort of held back or be sucked up by their anxiety or their concern. So transparency is part of consistency, that, you know, people aren't hearing one thing, right? But actually, you know, and this is not uncommon in organizations, especially if things are not aligned. So for example, it's not unusual for an executive to issue a memo to all staff that says something that is not really clear to the person that is hearing it, because they're hearing something very different from their supervisor. So the whole connection between these different levels of the hierarchy has to be very transparent. People can't sort of just go and exercise for example, a policy differently without letting everybody else in the organization know that this is happening or why it's happening. So again, this is part of truth and honesty in the workforce, in the workspace. Supervision has to be aligned with what the organizational goals are. So if an organization is going to really be healthy, and its supervisors need to know what the objectives and what the goals of the organization are. Again, safety, I can't say more about that. And then the whole question of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And is the workforce reflective of the community that's being served? We could do an entire 3 hours on the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're not going to get into it right now, but it's a very important part of health and resilience of an organization. And keep in mind here that there are resources for this. MCTAC, if you go to the MCTAC website, you'll find webinars and information on this subject. And keep your eyes open and your ears open, because I think this is an area that we're going to be hearing a lot more about in the future.
So Eve, before we move on to the next section, I just wanted to open it up and see if people had questions or comments about this so far.
Yeah, let me ask if people could just tell me, does this make sense? I mean, we're not getting, it's very hard to be in this virtual space because when you're in a room with people and you can see them, you can see on their faces that, there's sort of a recognition or an acknowledgement. But give us a break here. Give us a sense of, does this make sense to you? Or not?
And is there any idea that you might have, idea or bullet point maybe that we started talking about that you wanted us to expand on a little bit more?
Hi, so this is Jackie. I'm the one that's the Chief Operating Officer and overseeing HR as part of my role. And I think this absolutely makes sense. And one of the things that we've noticed is that we've had to enhance a lot of these bullet points in our virtual environment. I mean, it's stuff that we've done before, but particularly transparency. We've started having more virtual staff meetings more frequently. We have a very large staff, so we weren't able to get the staff together that often, but we've now done these virtual staff meetings where we're really letting our staff know the decisions that we're making around COVID and around their work schedules, and being very transparent in how we're coming to those decisions and different things like that. So I think this is all really key and very interesting about the job descriptions, because that's something we are struggling with right now as well.
Thank you for that feedback. And all I can say to you is you must have your hands full.
Just a little bit.
Yes. So it's great that you're even on this webinar. So and thank you for validating this, because when we hear it back from somebody who's living it, it means that we're at least sharing something that is going to hopefully be useful to the folks out there. So thanks.
And I think also your comment about sort of shifting quickly and things being so different now that so many of us are working remotely is really important. Certainly where I work, things have changed. We don't have we used to have like a monthly management meeting where we all drove up to Albany and everybody was together in the room. We obviously haven't been doing that. But we do Monday morning huddles now, right? Everybody's sort of adapted to the change pretty quickly. And that's helped us sort of maintain our resilience and maintain our health. I see we have something coming in the chat box. And that's from Tara.
I think it was just me.
Yep, that's from Tara, our new tool that may be able to help with job descriptions as part of the Workforce Priority Series. So she chatted that into the chat box. And there's a bunch of tools and resources that we're going to actually get to address as well in just a little bit. So let's move on, unless someone else has something that they wanted to say. I'll give you guys another 10 seconds or so to chime in if you like.
You know what, Danielle, I'm thinking that a lot of the people, when they identified themselves, a lot of the folks on this webinar were people on the front lines, right? And I'm just wondering, that, while you're not sort of in the HR role, it's pretty clear. As we're going through this, if you could start thinking, if you had an opportunity to communicate with the people in your organization around these things, would you have comments, or would you have suggestions, or would you have something to say in relation to what you're hearing here as to whether that component or that particular area is well developed in your organization or not? So think about it that way. So your self-awareness is where is your organization's health along these dimensions that we're mentioning.
And also, I think we'd want to hear about your feedback and get your feedback on how is your feedback set across, right? So how do you give feedback at your organization about culture? Is it requested often? Is it encouraged that you give your feedback? We want to hear a little bit about that too, I think. All right, so this is the last sort of section before we start to talk about tools and resources and job descriptions. And it's basically a few slides on maintaining a healthy and resilient culture. So part of maintaining a healthy and resilient organizational culture is using your policies, procedures, and employee manuals. I know it sounds like the biggest bore known to man, but it's certainly a necessity. And I say this all the time when we do other trainings, you know, policies and procedures sort of help keep things running smoothly. And your employee manual gives your workforce sort of rules to live by, if you will. And you want that manual to be consistent. Eve's been talking about consistency all morning, right? So making sure that your manual is consistent with what you're promising to your employees and what you're promising to the people who come into you for services. You know, think about the language that you're using in your employee manual. How are you engaging your staff? Do you want to expand on that a little bit, Eve?
Yeah, so for example, you know, I have working with a number of clients who say that they're a trauma-informed organization, and that's in their brand. So, right, and then you read their employee manual, and boy, is it far from being trauma-informed. Because if you're trauma-informed, then it's not only in terms of the practice that you employ, the practices that you employ to serve the people that you are there to serve, but it's also that you're trauma-informed with regard to how you work with your workforce, how you engage with your workforce, and how you kind of acknowledge that, you know, trauma is not something that's restricted to people that come for services, but that it exists in everybody's life. And so a trauma-informed organization needs to be trauma-informed all the way. And so this is just one example that is very, very flagrant, and that you see very often where there's a real lack of connection between what the employees' guiding principles are going to be and what the organization says that its guiding principles are as a whole. So that's an example of that, and I'm sure there are others.
Yes, that's a really good example.
So in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, this is a big deal, and I think that there needs to be a very specific effort here. And organizations, I know, have already begun to have these conversations and to have plans for becoming, if not already there, but certainly working to improve on these dimensions of a workforce and of an organizational culture. You know, and I think that when you talk about inclusion, it really is not only along, you know, racial lines, but it's also around diverse educational, cultural, and lived experience. So, you know, we're talking about gender here. We're talking about all sorts of areas where organizations need to take a hard look at how they and live in this domain of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then, you know, kind of more basic here is that you have an inclusive workforce, a diverse workforce, and that workforce has the skills, because, you know, at the end of the day, an organization has a purpose, and it has goals and objectives, and it has, you know, outcomes that it looks to be able to deliver, to achieve. And that if the workforce doesn't have the skills to reach those outcomes, then the organization is clearly out of sync with itself. And this sort of goes back to measuring, because how would you know whether an organization, a workforce is skilled or has the right skills. You know, because you look at on the other side of the efforts and the service delivery, what's happening with the people that are served. And so you have data there that tells you something, and then you use that data to go back and say, well, you know, it sounds like based on this data that there's a certain sector or there's a certain area of need that our workforce doesn't have the skills to deliver, to meet. So there's a way to look at this very not sort of impressionistically, but you know, very data driven, and that gives you the information you need, and then to go back and say, okay, look, we have to get our staff trained in these areas if they're going to be able to meet the needs of this, that, and the other population that is coming here for services.
All right, I'm going to move us ahead. So having a workforce retention strategy is just as important as some of these other bullets. You know, thinking about the wellness of your staff. You know, do you have an EAP? Do you have, you know, a health plan that includes both physical and behavioral health wellness? You know, what are you giving to your staff to make them feel good in every sense of the word, right? And then also part of workforce retention, you know, people stay at jobs because there's a room for advancement. There's room for skill acquisition. They feel like their skills are being developed. You know, is there a place for people to move up in the organization? You know, how are people encouraged to go to trainings? Are people encouraged to go to trainings to learn new skills? Whether that's skills of supervision or skills of, you know, an actual, perhaps intervention. So what are you doing to sort of keep your workforce happy, both physically, mentally, and
spiritually?
Spiritually, right, exactly,
right,
yeah.
Right. Let me say something about this, because you know what I kind of look at is my own, and look, you can all do the same thing. Look at your own experience and look at the supervisors that you've had, and who were the supervisors that you would say really made a difference in your capacity to your professionalism. And I think that supervisors, and this is sort of, for me, my best supervisors were the supervisors who were teachers. So they weren't only people who told me what to do and who, you know, I've had horrible supervisors who only told me what I didn't do. But you know, so there's that supervisor, and then there's a supervisor who tells you what to do, and they're not toxic, but that's all they do is they tell you what to do. But the supervisors that made a difference for me, that inspired me, that helped me with my career, and that helped me with my self-worth, were the ones who taught me, the ones who were the good teachers. And so workforce development consists, and you know, when you're an organization, one of the things that I heard recently is an organization described itself as a learning organization. And I thought that that was really great, you know, because what that says is you're going to come here and you're going to work here, and you're going to learn stuff. And we know that if after you've learned a lot of stuff, that not only will there be an opportunity for you to use that stuff in a higher and better paying position, but in the event that that doesn't happen, having worked here, you've gotten something that you have forever. You've been taught something, and that you have that, and that becomes part of who you are, and part of how you can advance in your career, whether it's with us or not. So that's key.
Can I butt in here for a second?
Yeah.
I have a question or a comment, I guess. One of the things that we struggle with is that we very much are a learning organization and pride ourselves on our training, but we lose our staff so not quickly, but people come, they train, they learn, and they move on. So how do you develop retention with social service being so difficult to keep salaries competitive and things like that?
Well, I'm gonna just say, do people, why are people leaving because of higher salaries? I mean, is that what you're,
Primarily, I would say primarily, yeah, it's salary driven.
Okay, well, I have to say that there could be one aspect that you could actually create in your organization is that within a position, you could have different levels of salary. So a person comes in at one salary, and then after they've acquired certain skills and learned that you could move them up a notch.
Right.
Now, I know that you're always dealing with the outside world and what the market will bear, right? So I have to say that that's a real issue. And by asking this question, it's a real issue, but I think there needs to be some internal accommodation to deal with that. So, sometimes you can, because sometimes you have to sort of move your resources around and say, look, this is a very important position, and we want to keep this position, and we want to keep this person, and we're going to have to figure out some way of, cutting back on some area to hold on to this because this is important. The other thing is that sometimes a person will stay because in addition to money, they're looking for some other kind of accommodation. So for example, you have a parent and you have a parent who has a child that has special needs. And so how flexible are you in helping this person? You can't give them a salary increase, but you can maybe give them a more flexible schedule, or a schedule that helps them meet their personal needs as well as your needs. So I think that yeah, there may be people who are sort of only money or driven by money, and that might be a real obstacle if you don't have sort of the flexibility of moving your resources around. But think about what other kinds of needs people have that may help them in their lives, and therefore making the job that you're offering them very valuable, because they might not get that accommodation somewhere else. And sometimes money is not everything.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I wanted to say something about wellness also. So let's look at right now what's happening with COVID, right? We have a workforce now that is extremely strained because COVID is not only affecting the people we serve, but it's affecting the workforce. I mean, people have lost loved ones. People are in those categories of being sort of very vulnerable to the infection, to the virus, and they are then kind of always worried. I mean, there's a certain level of worried about their own health and around their own well-being. So I don't know what people out there are thinking on an organizational level in terms of how do we address these things that are happening to our workforce? How are we supporting our workforce through this episode in our world, and how are we helping them to be well? So this cannot be kind of a haphazard approach. I think this has to be a very well thought out strategy on the part of an organization. And
and it also brings us to the next point where, looking at employee generated innovation, right? So we've all had to make adjustments and we've had to work from home. Have your employers asked you for feedback about what will make your job successful when you're working remotely, or when you're changing how you have to work because of the current situation?
What do you need right now?
How can we help you to do your job really well during this time?
And in there, Danielle, is an acknowledgement too, right? That we acknowledge that this is not business as usual, and that you may be sort of particularly affected by what's happening out there personally. Now, yes, we do have an expectation that you're going to do your job, and maybe we've offered you a sort of an alternative way of getting it done. But you know, this is a workforce crisis as well as a health crisis. I mean, it's a workforce health crisis here. So how are we as organizations addressing that? And again, all I'll say is that, you know, we can do a 2-hour webinar on that alone. But the point I want to make is that, without getting into the detail of what you can do, it's that whatever you're doing is well thought out and deliberate, that it's not just here and there, but there's some kind of deliberate, and there's some kind of organized approach and strategy to helping an organization's workforce be well, particularly in a moment like this. So it should exist in general, but particularly in a moment like this, it's crucial.
And I think just going back to the word consistent that we've said so many times this morning, I think that's really important to mention it again. You know, is your workforce retention strategy consistent with your mission, vision, and values, right? Are the things that you're asking your employees to do, whether they're in, you know, their office environment, out in the field, working from home, is it all consistent? And is it all aligned with what your organization's mission is? I'm going to actually move us along in the interest of time, because we only have about, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes left here. So I'm going to move us ahead. So we wanted to discuss some tools and resources with you all today. So this slide is basically a listing of all of the current tools and resources that are available through the Workforce Priorities webinar series, and you can find them at ctacny.org. So you've got a sample job description that promotes recovery-focused workplace. You have several interview guides, and we're going to break down some of those with you today. You've got one on recovery-focused and person-centered care, one on trauma-informed approaches, and one on whole health or integration of physical and behavioral health. And those interview guides are really a sample of questions that you can use when you are recruiting staff, as well as some others. So let's go into a little bit of the interview guide questions, just so that we can then talk a little bit about job descriptions. And then we'll sort of go from there.
Yeah, so integrated health. I mean, I hope that many of you have been in webinars and training around what integrated health is. So very briefly, it's also you know, referred to as whole person health. And what it means is that when you are working with someone, whether you are on the medical side or whether you are on the behavioral health side, that you aren't looking at a person in a sort of a constricted or siloed way. So if you're working with somebody, and here we're all in the behavioral health world, so yeah, so we're talking about mental health and substance abuse, fine. But also when we're working with someone who is coming to us for help or assistance around those issues, that we don't ignore the fact that this person also has, in addition to those issues, that person also, you know, is a body, and that body, you know, consists of, you know, brains, of emotions, but also of organs and health, physical health. And so, you know, an example of this is that, you know, if you're working with somebody who has a chronic disease, that you have to kind of address their addiction, yes, if that's what you are there to do, but you can't really kind of ignore the fact that they have a diabetes or hypertension. So a whole person approach, an integrated health approach, sort of forces both the medical side and the behavioral health side to kind of be working for a person in a whole person way. So what you're looking for when you hire somebody is you're looking to ask questions and what their knowledge is about whole health, and that they have experience perhaps in some way, and they can share with you in the interview what that experience is in terms of how they address both dimensions of a human being. So that you might kind of ask, again, what you'll see in those interview questions and the resources that Daniela just talked about, are specific questions that you can ask to see how well versed the person is in understanding and being able to work in a way that is integrated around the health of the people that they're serving.
All right, and then the other one, or one of the other two rather, is focused on recovery focused and person-centered care. So really helping, asking questions to understand and identify where someone's coming from. Do they have an idea or an understanding of recovery, and what is that? What is their idea or understanding of recovery? Because it may be very different than yours. You know, do they feel that people have the ability to make change and to recover and to move past a mental health diagnosis or a behavioral health diagnosis? You know, what is their attitude towards recovery? What's their attitude towards person-centeredness? I like this question. This is just a sample. How do you respond if you think a person that you're working with is making a bad decision? You know, do they have sort of that patriarchal or matriarchal thinking and mentality around recovery and person-centeredness, or is it more about being collaborative and joining with the person in their journey towards recovery? Those are the kind of, so just a couple of samples of some of the questions on the interview guides. There's also a section on each of them around recruiting and asking questions related to trauma focus, recovery focus, and whole health for supervisors when you're hiring for supervisors as well. So we encourage you to check those resources out. And now we've got sort of a chat box question for you, or you can unmute your phone and feel free to answer that way too. How do you think these questions could help you to recruit and hire employees who share your organization's beliefs and practices around whole health, for example? And if you're not in a position, like many of you are not in a position to hire or recruit staff, how does it make you start to think, what does it make you start to think about your own work when you look at some of these questions? And how does it sort of propel you to move forward in your work when you think about some of these questions?
Also, you know, think about what you might need in terms of training, because we're talking about workforce development here, right? We're talking about bringing somebody on who sort of has some of an understanding. The person may agree that, you know, whole health is important and whole person health is important, but may not sort of really have the skill set yet. You know, they may kind of have the belief and they may have the interest. So in terms of that, think about your own, if you were to adopt a whole health approach to care that you do, what skills would you need, and what would you let your organization know you need in terms of training in order to be able to deliver services in a whole person way? Just another angle.
Actually, I'm really curious to hear from the group about whether or not they have that open communication line, that they do feel comfortable that they can share what their training needs are with folks who either supervise them or with an HR person. So I'm curious if folks would feel comfortable sharing that information as well, because I think that speaks to organizational culture too. So feel free to chat it. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Arami. Hi.
Hi.
So I just wanted to say that my organization has come a long way. I actually first started out with my organization as an AmeriCorps and transitioned into the position that I am in now. But I will say that, you know, I'm not saying that everything is perfect, but it's getting to where it needs to be. And considering that as a not-for-profit organization, you know, it's different every day. But what I will say is that on a very positive note, you know, they've been inquiring a lot about, you know, just the worker and, you know, what the worker's needs are. However, I just really wish that the implementation of, you know, groups, you know, perhaps that would actually help us address, you know, racial inequalities, you know, and things like that, that those will be implemented by the workers themselves instead of, you know, CEOs and managers and alike. Because I just feel like as a worker, you know, you do have a different prospect and projection in terms of what your job duties are. Is very different from someone who has a little bit more power per se. And I wish that implementation would come down the line eventually, because they have tried to implement certain groups around racial inequality so that people do have a safe place, but they and I'm not speaking ill about it, but it's just, you know, essentially it's just my opinion. However, I feel like they haven't really been hitting the mark with that. And I really value, you know, I value everyone else's opinion, especially if we're on that same level. And it's a very different projection that you get from someone who is a little bit more higher up from you. So I kind of feel like, you know, it would be really nice for us to kind of govern ourselves with that, considering that we do have a different prospect and a different perspective when it comes to certain, I guess, certain categories and certain things in that type of conversation. But and also, you know, money does not, it doesn't annul everything and it doesn't fix everything. It's nice to get that support financially, but it's not enough. If, you know, if every day you're using your you know, you're using your mental, you know, your mental health, you know, in order to help other people who are, you know, mentally challenged and physically challenged, it's very taxing on someone, you know. It's me specifically, and I'm sure other people feel the same, when you don't really have a safe place, and, you know, the organization just wants to kind of give you money as if that's what's, you know, that's like the one size fits all effort. And I just wish that they would implement more, but we don't know what it's going to look like tomorrow. It may just change. And I still have hope for the future.
Boy, you said so much, right? Yeah, like unpacking that, man. I mean, we could talk for another 2 hours. Really,
yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely, yes.
No,
and I
thank
pulled one thing. I'll tell you one thing that I pulled from what you said that sort of struck a chord with me was values, right? And you said, you know, for you, it's not all about how much you get paid. I mean, certainly, yes, our salaries are important, right? We have to pay bills and support ourselves and others, and that's fine.
Right.
But values, I think our personal values really do have to align with the organization's mission, vision, and values, because I mean, I'll tell you, I think I agree with you. I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say I agree with you. And I think your values are that you'd rather work in a place where you feel comfortable, where you enjoy the work that you're doing and you enjoy the people you work with, both, you know, the clients you provide services to and your coworkers.
Yes.
You'd take that over like a super high paying job.
Yeah, because, you know, I mean, you know, because after a while, you know, it just becomes so taxing and you're just like, oh my God, I'm so emotionally distraught because, you know, I really can't keep it together and I don't have a safe place. And, you know, to really not have that implemented in the workforce it's complicating because, you know, to go out and to do it yourself. I mean, it's nice to have things under one roof, you know, and really have those conversations with each other, because I don't think we have them enough.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's healthy. That's healthy. It helps us to grow as an organization and, you know, with each other.
Yeah. I will just say that, you know, some conversations are more difficult to have. And I think that you're making that point, but you're saying, what I hear is, let's not shy away because they're difficult. And let's figure out better ways of having those. And let's figure out ways of having those conversations in an environment and in a culture where we feel safe. Because they are difficult conversations. And if one if one doesn't feel safe in being able to say what one thinks and one feels, there's going to be no progress in that domain. It's not, nothing is going to change.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's really, that's the beginning of changing the culture, is having those conversations, right? And sort of being comfortable with the uncomfortableness of it.
Yes,
Right.
yes, and being present in the moment.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm going to be present in the moment because we have about 5 minutes left.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for
that was great. Thank
allowing
you.
me to.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just really quick, just a quick slide about soft skills. You know, you might want to also think about the sort of personality-based skills that people have as opposed to the things that they've learned in school. So things like collaboration, communication, power sharing, de-escalation, their ability to be compassionate or empathic, to listen non-judgmentally. Power sharing, I'm just going to pick that one, for example. When I was, before I started working at NIAPRS, I was working at a behavioral health program, and I was one of their program directors for one of their outpatient programs. And it was really important to me that the people I hired had the ability to power share, that they were not going to sort of tell the person, this is what I need you to do, and this is the only way you're going to get better, but they were going to listen, and they were going to say, you know, I believe that you are the expert in what you've experienced, and you can, you know, help me learn how to work with you. As power sharing, I think, is also important for when you're looking for supervisors, when you're hiring supervisors. It's a great skill of a supervisor, in my opinion. Someone that will sort of walk with you and not ahead of you and sort of share and learn along with you. So that was just my 2 cents on soft skills. And we had a question around soft skills, but I think we're going to actually move a little bit further into towards the end of the presentation. So job descriptions, just a couple of slides here around job descriptions. We want you to think about, you know, when you're reading job descriptions, when you're creating job descriptions, there are some things that we think you can look at and that you should include in order to attract sort of the right candidate or the person that you're really trying to match with or find. And this was taken from the resource tool, which you can also find at the CTAC website. So Yves, do you want to go ahead and just go through this slide real quick while I check the chat box?
Yeah, I would say here very quickly, the way you word, this is my kind of focus on this, the way you word a job description, the language should be language that reflects your organization's values, mission. So if you're a person-centered, recovery-oriented, trauma-informed organization, use language and use words that reinforce those concepts and those ideas in the job descriptions when you're describing job responsibilities.
And where you're describing your organization. And we actually have a couple of examples of that on this next slide. So look at the language. The language is really key, you know, talking about using words like partner with, have the ability to familiarity with, I can never say that word. And those are kind of the things that the language that you might want to use to draw people in. But however you choose to advertise for your positions, remember that the key takeaway here is to ensure that you are hiring for the job that you're posting. So make sure that those job responsibilities, again, that word consistency comes up, right? That your job responsibilities align with the work that you're doing, as well as the mission, vision, and values. So we have like a minute left, and we really were hoping that we could ask the group to sort of share a top priority that they would like to address as far as the resilience or health of their organization. So what's one sort of takeaway that you could, like the light bulb went off from having this conversation with us today, and say like, this is something that I think, you know, we could certainly work on where I work, or this is something that we're really good at and we're going to use that strength to like strengthen our organization a little bit more. So if you could just chat that in, that would be great. And if you have any questions, this is the time to bring them up.
I'd like to say something really quick.
Go for it.
It's Army again. So I would say transparency is like a really big one for me. Just the ability to be transparent and to be communicative with each other, and just as an organization as a whole, and just the ability to be an active listener.
Awesome.
So are you saying that exists in your organization, or you're saying that's something to aspire for?
Oh, that's something to aspire for.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that really goes for everyone else, but I know that I've been a part of this organization long enough to just know, in my heart, what is existing and what is not existing. So yeah, I would say definitely those three aspects definitely need a little more work.
Good.
And change takes
Thank you.
time.
Right.
Change takes time.
Yeah, it does.
And I think
it does. Absolutely, it does. And considering that, just like with everything that has been happening with the coronavirus, and with just everything just changing overnight, I'm not expecting it to be like set in stone like right then and there. However, to be an active listener is to listen to your employees and to take feedback from them. And I would hope that feedback would help in the long run, in the future, for what, for just improvement, and just helping us as an organization so that we can do our due diligence and do what we set out to do every day, when we wake up. So.
Yep. And, changing culture takes time too. And so I think that must, that could mean a number of things for a number of people, right? Whether that means working on internal communication, whether that means making your organization more person-centered or more inclusive, that could mean so many things for so many folks. Somebody actually just typed in the chat box, they appreciate the fact that their organization is a person-centered one for the staff as well as the customers that they serve, and they operate as a family doing business. So that's really nice. Thank you for sharing that. We appreciate that. Just a couple of things to sort of remind you of, things that are coming up in the Workforce Priorities Series. Tomorrow, there's a webinar on managing performance. It's not too late to register for that. October 1st, there's a webinar on employee engagement, and then the pre-employment screening tool package will be available in October, hopefully by October 15th. So with that,
well, just tell them just tell them they can register for that by going to the
CTAC website, MCTAC CTAC website, ctacny.org. You can also go to that website for the MCTAC and CTAC resources. The entire Workforce Priorities webinar series is in there, recording so far. So you can watch those. Tara also put a link to those in the chat box if you want to take a quick glance in there. We've also got the link for the organizational cultural assessment questionnaire that we mentioned early on, that one pager that kind of helps you get a look at, a general look at what your organization's overall culture is. And I think with that, we're going to probably end this because we're already a few minutes over time. So we wanted to say thank you. I would like to say thank you to Tara for putting all this together for us today behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you,
and working
Tara.
with us. Thank you to all of you who came today. And thank you to you, Eve, for doing this with me. So I appreciate all of you. And we hope that you will continue to participate in MCTAC and CTAC offerings in the future. And we hope that you stay well. And we'll see you again soon.
So take care, everyone. Be healthy.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
So much.